Hi everyone! Today I'm going to go over how I created this realistic eye using graphite. So the first thing when doing realism is that you have to have an accurate sketch, not only because you want the piece to look accurate, but also the worst thing that can happen is spending hours shading and rendering your piece only to find later that your drawing itself is awkward and not going to work. So value your time, save yourself the frustration, and create an accurate sketch, whether that be by using grid method, measuring and plotting, or whatever method you choose, even if it's tracing, because you want to practice seeing and mimicking values. Accurate drawing takes a very long time to master, so don't be discouraged. I know people tend to frown upon tracing, but rendering, shading, understanding values, and colors if you're using color is an art of its own. There's a time to practice drawing and structure and a time to practice shading and details. I also just made a video on how to make your reference photo into a sketch which strips the color and values from your reference photo so that you can see what it should look like as a line drawing. The reason this is valuable is because values can really trick your brain into seeing things incorrectly, as values do give the subject its form. So this is a great way to train your brain into seeing what's actually there. Now my sketch is very hard to see in the video, but it is there. I'm not drawing this out of the blue and rendering at the same time. I actually took a lot of time to map out my initial sketch first. So for the rendering process, I started with the pupil using the HB No. 2 lead pencil, and I added some Payne's gray before going in with the black colored pencil so it wasn't straight black. And as far as I can tell, that's really optional. You can just use a black colored pencil for this part. Then for the iris, I started by mapping out the shapes that I saw in my reference photo. So these shapes were not sketched in initially, but it's such a small section that I was pretty confident that I could draw this in accurately on my own. And the fact of the matter is, for the iris, there's a lot of room for error. Really, no one is going to notice if anything is a little bit off or I didn't get it exact. As long as I get the highlights and the darker areas right, there's more freedom here. But if your goal is to get better at drawing, try to add everything you see from your reference as best as possible. So I use the 4B pencil to draw in the darker areas and the lead pencil to shade in the midtones. I leave the highlighted areas alone, or I'll use the Tombow mono eraser to lift color in those areas if needed. So keep in mind that the darker areas are typically around the pupil and around the edges of the iris. Also, it tends to be darker under the lid, but in this case, I didn't really bother to worry about that since the eyelashes are going to be covering most of that area in this case. But really do pay attention to the darks and the lights in the iris because that is what's going to give it its form. For the white of the eye, if you've watched any good artists here on YouTube, they will tell you that the white of the eye isn't so white after all. And that's because the eye is a ball shape, and if you understand how light hits a ball or a sphere, you understand that there will be some shadow. It's also covered with two outer lids, which means even more shadow. So right where the two lids meet is going to be the darkest. And then you want to blend it out, keeping in mind that the eye is the shape of a ball or a sphere. So now I'm just darkening the creases of the upper lid, getting it prepped and ready for shading. Again, with the lid at the crease, it's a fold, and so therefore there's going to be shadow there as well. There's also shadow under the lid. Now I'm just layering the graphite. I keep darkening the crease as I build up the layers and adding the small creases that I see in my reference that will also help make the piece look a little more realistic. As you build layers, you'll see that you'll have to darken the darker areas even more. Now I'm just defining the smaller creases and then darkening the lid some more before blending and repeating the process. Now I'm darkening the main crease with a sharp black pencil. The black pencil that I'm using is from the Faber Castell Polychromo set. For the tear duct, I'm just following my reference photo. I'm identifying the shape, which looks similar to a triangle, and I'm darkening the area around the crease of it and adding highlights. Now I'm just laying down some light graphite on the lower lid, and notice how I'm holding the pencil far back while blending. When laying down graphite on a large area, try to take your time and keep it soft. Also try cross-hatching or making a more circular motion with your pencil to create a more blended look. Here I'm darkening the creases below the eye so that I don't lose them in the shading process. So now it's just a matter of layering. Again, patience is needed, so listen to some music, relax, meditate, and enjoy the process. I'm also going to be using the 4B pencil in areas that need to be darker, since the tissue kept wiping away my lighter graphite. If that happens, get a darker pencil. And as you're layering, be sure to keep darkening the creases as needed so that you don't lose them. For the lower lashes, my advice is to pay attention to where the lash starts and where it ends, as well as what direction they're going in, and keep in mind that they are curving out of a ball-like form. So that means that they don't go straight out or straight down. And not only do they curve out, but most likely they overlap each other in a crisscross fashion or motion, and some may even go in a completely different direction than the rest. Also, the lash is usually thicker where it begins than where it ends, which sometimes also means that it'll be darker where it starts or at the base of the lash than it is at the tip. As you can see, I have a piece of paper on the left. That is my reference photo, and I'm really focusing on mimicking the lashes that I see in that photograph. For the upper lashes, again, I'm really studying my reference. I'm keeping it real close because lashes are not the same for everyone. They're not always in clumps, but they're not uniform either. And not all of us are perfect models with great makeup artists that can make our lashes absolutely perfect. So you'll notice on the left, the lashes fall downward over the eye, which is one of the reasons why I picked this photo. It's because the angle and how the lashes kind of drape over the eye and then curve out and up as we move to the right. And you really get to see that transition happen going from left to right. Again, these lashes are pretty dark, so I'm using a very sharp black pencil and studying my reference. I'm copying how I see the lashes behave in the picture. Now that isn't to say that I'm copying each and every individual lash, but I am kind of seeing it in sections. Like, how are the lashes behaving in the very left corner when it's pretty dark as opposed to the white of the eye, to when I get to the iris and so on. So again, at the very left corner of the eye, the lashes look lazy and drape downward. Then at the white of the eye, they are picking themselves up a bit. And as we get to the iris, that's when we notice the lashes really start to make that curve. Also note the length of the lashes. In the corner, they look pretty long, and as we move towards the iris, they shorten up a bit. This is kind of like the foreshortening. They're not really that short, it's just the angle that makes them look that way, and so that's how you want to draw them. And then by the right hand side, they are very long and lifted, and some of them are even lighter since they're hitting the light. Once you get the lashes established, then you can go in and make them darker and bolder in the areas that need it. Sometimes I use an eraser to break them up a bit, and also note that the lash line, where the lashes are starting from, is also darker. And now I start on the brow. So you know, the brow can take a lot of time. It can be just as or more complicated than the lashes. As there's typically a natural flow, the hairs that make up the brow can also go in different directions, and depending on the person can be different each time. So I start with light pencil marks to establish the flow and then blend it out. There's also this dark area by the tail end of the brow that links up with the corner of the eye where those fine creases are. Make sure to blend this out. Then I go in with a sharp black pencil and redefine the hairs within the brow. Note how some hairs are long and others are short, and how some start under the brow and others start above the brow. Typically, they tend to meet somewhere in the middle. I would definitely pay attention to the flow of the hair within the brow. This happens quite often, and I would definitely study the brow. So I just keep layering and blending and adding hairs, and eventually it comes together and you'll have a perfect brow. I also use my Tombow mono eraser to break up some of the hairs that need it. Also, I wouldn't omit the stray hairs around the brow, as including them will give your piece a more natural look. Just be sure to double check how long they are, what direction they're going in, and how dark they are. Now I'm just darkening the areas and taking in the piece as a whole to determine what needs revisiting and more shading. I'm also adding details if needed. This piece took me 3.5 hours long. Probably wouldn't have taken that long if I hadn't used the tissue so much and moved on to a darker pencil from the beginning. It seemed to really pick up a lot of the graphite and caused me to feel like I had to start over each time. But I do love the tissue method as it really gives a smooth look that is much more realistic close up. So that's it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video and that it helps. I think understanding that the initial drawing itself took a lot of time and the rendering process that you've just watched took 3.5 hours gives a better idea of how long a realistic drawing actually takes. And the drawing isn't that big, maybe about the size of my hand. There's also some hesitancy and studying that happens as well as breaks, which are not included in that time. Anyway, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, let me know in the comment section and I'll see you all next time.